I'd like to start by saying you should play the video. It tells the truth about Vera. I am a fireman. I am an EMR. I am a former Navy veteran. I am a father of 8, and I am a bail bondsman. Where's the risk assessments, Mr. Wool? You have 5,500 people assessed, and you pay them for assessments, but you don't look at the assessments. Look at the assessments. Takeen Scott was a 3, guys. He's a 6 now. Telly Hankton's an 8. Ted Bundy's a 3.
Sometimes when we use the term pretrial services, we use it loosely, talking about stuff that happens pretrial, and sometimes we talk about it as if it's a particular entity. We have to make a decision on budget. We have to make a decision on where we spend a fairly sizable amount of money. And my question is, does the criminal justice system work better if we spend it on the group that we are currently using to evaluate inmates prior to trial, or is there a better way to spend that money? And in particular, I'm talking about the money we spend on Vera, or we are being asked to spend on them.
And when Vera came in, quite frankly, when they first came in, it was designed to be a handoff program to whoever it was going to be turned over to, that Vera was here to set up a prototype, help us with the setup, and then it was going to become another issue.
I assume that any pretrial services are there to aid you in what you do, and I need to know what you want us to do on that issue.
Kentucky has it set up. They've got the premier, so they say, the premier pretrial services. It's run by the judiciary because the judiciary sets up the protocol and the parameters. They set up the guidelines for who they're hiring because that's the person who's given the judge the information. That's the person that the judge is looking to. Traditionally, it's always been just looking to the DA. The DA is supposed to give us the criminal history and the bad stuff about the person. The public defender is supposed to give us the mitigating and the good stuff about the person. And then we make the call as the judge. Whether it's a good call or a bad call, we make the call. You've now inserted pretrial services, and the issue that you're asking is what do the judges want to see from pretrial services? There obviously been some issues with, I'll bring up the Mother's Day shooting. That was a case that obviously that person was given a risk assessment by pretrial services, and that person was given a bond that maybe was based on bad information that arrested subject gave to the pretrial services person. We've got no control over who is giving us the information with pretrial services.
These people say they can protect us. You can pre-evaluate somebody to determine if they're a risk. I can't do that. I've been doing this for 21 years. I've been looking at people that are in jail and getting them out. And the one thing I never tell you is I can determine if they'll commit another crime. I promise to return them. Does he? How do they get them back to court? Do they get them back to court? What is their responsibility, Madam Guidry, other than to get a paycheck?
Let me just tell you, Vera did tell us that they looked at 580 inmates, and they thought that over 250 of them should have been released, inmates who had not been released. At the current cost of about $30 a day, that's about $7,500 a day to the city.
It's 40% of the population, if in fact those numbers are correct. That's outrageous.
And if the people are anywhere near right about what it's going to cost us after this consent decree, the numbers really get crazy.
What do they do for this city that's worth $500,000+ that the court doesn't do already? There's not one thing in the risk assessment that's private. I have one.
Start with what I think I've always said. I'm kind of a traditionalist. I'm kind of conservative in a lot of things. I began as an assistant DA in 1986. Our job as prosecutors was to march into first appearances. Ben was there. What? 10 a.m., 5 a.m., 5 p.m., and 11 p.m. 3 appearances. You'd march in there with your full rap sheet, your gist, maybe a little bit of about what happened to the victim. Your job was to advocate a certain amount of bond, right? Defendant's there, his lawyer, public defender's there. Their job is to advocate for mitigation, to say, Judge, he doesn't have a criminal history. They may have booked it aggravated battery, but it was really just a punch, right? The judge, hopefully the objective judge, makes a call. That's the way it's always worked. Pretrial services does do a good job in that they come in and they do a little bit more of a one-on-one with the defendant. But I'm going to go back to what I said 2.5, 3 years ago when John Wool, we were sitting in the basement at NOPD headquarters. I said, well, who's going to be giving the judge this information? Well, we're going to, develop a criteria for hire. I'm like, well, what's going to be their background? Are they going to have a criminal justice background? How do they know how to read a rap sheet? When I look to the DA, they're an officer of the court. When I look to the public defender, they're an officer of the court. I love my daughter. I think she's brilliant. She graduated from Tulane with 2 degrees, but I wouldn't want her reading a rap sheet and talking to somebody, and that person who's arrested says, yeah, I'm in college. I live at home with my mom. I've had the same house for 20 years. I want somebody that is in there that has a vested interest in being an officer of the court to tell me as the judge what I'm getting ready to sign off on. I think that's the lack of buy-in that our court has with Vera in pretrial. I mean, I talked to a commissioner just last week, and they said, Judge, they don't go beyond 10 years. 10 years is their cutoff for the rap sheet. And I said, well, who came up with that mark, 10 years? What if the guy's got a murder from 15 years ago? Does anybody jump up and say, Mr. DA, does the DA jump up and say, wait, you should go back beyond 10 years, Judge, because he had a murder in 1984? Those are the things we don't know as judges about Vera. We've got no control over who they hire, what they tell us, and what their mission is.
You're paying them for money saved. Every missed court date costs money. Who missed court? You won't tell us who missed court. You won't tell us who they've looked at. You won't tell us one person that they've assessed. So how can you determine if they're saving us money? If you say releasing people, fewer people in jail means less crime, close the jail. Then we have no crime.
If you want to save money, then let's eliminate some bureaucracy. If you want to save our citizens money, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, the decision comes from the bench. And it may put more emphasis on the defense attorney or the prosecution who may look for an increase in the bond. It may put more an impetus on their jobs if, in fact, they didn't have this third party involved in the equation.
This is an insane way of doing business. I applaud Judge Hanson and the rest of the magistrates for ignoring a 3 on Akeem Scott. I applaud them for ignoring a 6. He shot 19 people, and he's a 6. He's not a 24. You know, if you live in your own house for 6 months, you can't be a 24, ever, ever.
What do you really think? Because I know what you say off camera. I want to get you to say it on camera. This is a $600,000 item that we're looking at in the budget. I'm looking at, Mr. Moret, how much did you say you guys are in the hole?
Approximately 863,000.
So that could almost wipe you out the hole. You know, you'd only have to find $200,000. Now, I'm not saying throw out pretrial services before everybody over here gets, that she wants to throw away pretrial services. What I want to find out is, can we as a city operate pretrial services without Vera? And what I've heard from the municipal judges and what I've heard from you is that we could.
I want you to know that a lot of the people you hear here today that are against pretrial services as rendered by the Vera Institute are not against pretrial services, including myself. We understand the importance of not allowing low-level, nonviolent offenders to languish in our jail for whatever reason. We support that, and we have always supported that. Our issue is this. Mr. Wool, in all his great efforts, has provided us information about the success. I've counted it. He used the word 8 times. The success of his program. But I challenge any of you to tell me if you've actually seen the data. You haven't. And how can Mr. Wool claim success and the Vera Institute claims success, if the timelines, as what see, we are pretrial services too. Mr. Dennis, who spoke before you, he's pretrial services. We've been doing pretrial services for 20 years. This entity of evaluation and assessments and risk assessments is just another element to that process. So we're not opposed to pretrial services, Council Lady, but we understand that public safety should be paramount.
Again, I believe that we all recognize the overcrowding problems, and I think whether the legislature thinks that somebody on the third offense marijuana who's a double bill should be eligible for 20 years in the penitentiary, whether they think that or not, we all know here, or at least hopefully we all know here, that it's really kind of ridiculous. I mean, those are the easy ones. It's those other second-class cases where people are committing the violent offenses that we need to have actually more information.
Philadelphia, they pay $3 million a year for fugitive warrant squad with the pretrial services program. What are we going to do when our police department is sitting here saying, I need more money and more officers so I can return some of the people that the pretrial services program got released on their own signature and a handshake?
At the end of the day, members of the council, it is the judge and no one else who has to make a decision as to whether or not his or her name will be attached to that release. No one else's name will be made a part of a news story. No one else's name will be dragged through the gutter. When it came to the Mother's Day shooting, the judge was relying upon information from a third-party organization, who may not have had any say-so, but for the fact that they've been funded by the city council or other government agencies. I can tell you this, I do not need a third party giving me information that when I was an assistant prosecutor under Mr. Connick, it was my job as the assistant district attorney to inform Judge Hanson and all of the commissioners in evening court the information regarding, I guess, risk assessment of an individual and the appropriate amount of a bond. It was the job of the prosecutor, and at the same time, the public defender would also weigh in on it so that the judge would be given as much information as possible.
It is impossible to guess whether a person will commit a future crime. This is insanity. Thank you.
But we do believe that our public safety issues and the fact that what we do as bail agents is important. And what we do that nobody here is talking about is returning defendants to court when they fail to appear.